Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon as Georgia turns the page from a very rare regular season loss, taking one 41-34, tough defeat in Tuscaloosa to Alabama, and now getting ready for the Deep South's oldest rivalry, getting a chance to host longtime rival Auburn on Saturday afternoon. But as you guys would probably expect, we're going to start this episode looking back at that game. Obviously, a late kick. Kipp and I weren't able to pop on the podcast with Ben, who, hey, kudos to Ben, did a great job off the cuff talking about that game and everything that happened. But let's jump into it and discuss what we thought coming out of that game. And I'll start and just talk about some of the stuff I wrote on Monday in the rewatch. I really felt like the offense starting slow, so much of it boiled down to execution. And I felt like there were some folks who were mad at Mike Bobo, getting after him, thought that Carson, just was absolutely horrible and a lot of the blame was on him. Now, I thought Carson really struggled in the second quarter, but that followed a first quarter where puts a ball right on Arian Smith on a deep shot that Arian has to catch. There's really no argument around it. I mean, I know that's a very difficult play to make, but when the ball is in your hands like that, you got to make it. Dominic Lovett, OPI, I thought it was a really obvious offensive pass interference. I don't know many folks who were pushing against that. Second drive, another really bad mistake by Arian Smith. They check to a screen. I guess he just didn't get the check, keeps running down the field. Easy interception. That was tough. And I will give credit, as I've done on our board. I thought Arian bounced back in a big way in the second half. It would have been very easy after those two early mistakes to just go, pout and be upset and, get down on yourself. And Arian didn't. And, he was a big part of why Georgia was able to come back. He made some big plays. And then I thought in the second quarter, Carson just started pressing. And, he threw a pick trying to throw to Arian where he just didn't get enough on the ball and led to a fairly easy interception. The safety, I didn't really understand, and I tried to look at it again. Alabama had 8 in the box, very clearly showing pressure. I didn't really understand why Georgia had a play where it was sort of long developing. It didn't seem like Carson either checked or even had like a quick route to just get the ball out because Alabama was bringing pressure. So that was tough. And then looking at the defense, just got outplayed. And I talked about this during the game, tweeted about it. To me, that first half against Jalen Milroe looked like a high school game that I'd seen 1,000 times, where you got the really, 5-star marquee player, and he's playing against guys that, once they graduate high school, are not going to be playing anymore. I mean, they just had no answer for Jalen. And credit for them for how they stepped up in the second half. I do think that Alabama kind of took the foot off the throttle a little. They didn't have quite as many plays where Jalen just scrambled. They had more design runs, and I thought Georgia was better prepared for that. But, I wrote about, again, in that rewatch, it's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. That was a really bad first half on both sides of the ball for Georgia. But you saw the opportunities, especially on offense. There were ways they could have kept up, and mistakes were made, and good opportunities went to the wayside. And, credit to how they bounced back in the second half. But at the end of the day, I was looking at some of the numbers. You turn the ball over 4 times, and, you lose a turnover battle by 3 on the road against a top 5 team. You're lucky you only lose by 7. You are – again, really lucky it wasn't worse than that. And I give a lot of credit to both sides of the ball for how they responded, because I felt like that had the potential to be a game where, you just in that second half, you're just like, you're just watching the clock trying to get out of there. We took one on the chin in the first half, and we're just going to get out of here. And they didn't do that. And I do think that they deserve a lot of credit for that. Kipp, you were there with me in Tuscaloosa. You followed this one. We've had a few days now removed from it. What has stuck with you? Any parting thoughts from this game?
I feel like this game is the ultimate Rorschach test for whether you come out of this with an optimistic look or a pessimistic look if you're Georgia. On one side, we talked about coming out of the bye week with different looks, how Georgia needed to do that, and you have to assume that that's what Alabama planned to do, and they did. And in the first half, Georgia's defense was completely unprepared, and clearly, even listening to Kirby Smart, they were surprised by the looks that Alabama showed, really in offense and defense. And I think Kirby he tried to shoulder the blame for that. And I think like Georgia moving forward, it actually depends on whether he actually takes the accountability for that and uses it instead of just attempting to protect his players a little bit, because it does obviously fall on the coaching staff. And so the other side of that is there are fans that came out of that game feeling better than they did the week before. Like the Kentucky game was a win that felt like a loss. For some people, this loss to Alabama still kind of felt like a win because you saw something from Georgia in the second half that you hadn't really seen before. So I think that, again, which one of these you mentioned the tale of two halves, like which Georgia team is this? And I think at the end of the day, coming out of the gate like Georgia did in the spotlight against that team, you had the 2 weeks to prepare. Again, that's on the coaching staff. And Kirby talked about, the execution, whether that's how many reps do you do in practice? I believe it's he got asked like, you're not going to practice a play one time and say we've gotten enough looks at it. If you do it 20 times, then we're not doing as many plays, the volume of plays that we want to get ready and get right. Well, the plays that they did, the Aaron Smith not knowing what the play is and running the wrong route, the even him not being able to reel the catch in. What happened in practice to where they thought these plays were going to be able to be executed against Alabama on the road in that environment? That's the question I have is, yes, it does come down to execution, but you apparently saw enough in practice to think you could execute that in this environment, and you were not able to. And then the second half, is this offense being more aggressive by design, or was it because you were in desperate times? I think early in the game they tried to be aggressive, but again, these play calls they weren't able to execute. So I think there are still plenty of question marks. But at the same time, it becomes almost more inexcusable when you see that what Georgia was able to do in the second half. You do that for 4 quarters, you're coming out. Maybe you have a double-digit win in this situation. You took the lead in this game, and you were a decision to not bracket Ryan Williams away from possibly winning this game. So I think, there's plenty of questions coming out of this game. And I think the one thing that you do take as a positive, it does look like Georgia is capable of being explosive on offense and making adjustments and reeling in a dynamic player like Jalen Milroe for the most part. But you learned a lesson here that you can't do it for 2 quarters and get away with it.
A couple of things that come to mind, some of it on what Kipp was just saying, looking at how that game played out. If you're a Georgia fan, I do think you would have preferred it the way it played out, of the 2 options of really bad first half, outstanding second half. Flip it, and let's say they started good. They're in like a 17-17 shootout at halftime, and then just lay an egg in the second half, which to me reminds me of that 2021 SEC title game. Because to me, you're like, here we go again. You give credit to Alabama for the way it adjusted and Georgia's inability to. Again, Georgia wants to win the game. No fan is going to take the moral victory of, well, they played much better in the second half. But I think you would take that of the option of a half to play well in. Give a shout out to Dog Nation's Connor Riley. He pointed this out to me when we were leaving the press box. No sacks. Did not sack Jalen Milroe one time. And you're just not going to beat Alabama. You're not going to beat Jalen Milroe like that. I think Georgia had 4 in the SEC title game back in December. You have to hit him. You have to affect him. And I thought their pressure was a little bit more effective in the second half. But again, you have to get him on the ground. I think Jalen Milroe deserves a ton of credit. I thought he looked so much more accurate as a passer. The throw on the wheel route to Jam Miller, Jam Miller had the edge on CJ Allen, but that was a perfect throw to hit him in the end zone. Jalen played great. The interception was, probably one of his worst throws. He threw behind the receiver, and the receiver bobbled it, which let Dan Jackson intercept it. And I want to say that too. Defensive MVP Dan Jackson, 10 tackles, half a tackle for loss, that interception. If they don't get that interception, it probably is a blowout, because that had followed, I think, a Georgia turnover and was a chance to knock out Georgia for good. And Dan made a really heads-up play. Jerry Dogs fan on YouTube asked if Nate Frazier made the trip. He did. He did not play. I watched him a little bit in warm-ups. Kirby talked about that on Monday, said that, he's still coming along. He's still progressing. I'll say this, that I had heard that, he's a freshman back, and it sounds like he's had some trouble holding on to the football in practice. And when you know that, it kind of makes more sense why they didn't roll him out there. He's a guy that's still learning. He's still coming along. And again, we're talking about the margin for error in games like this, especially on the road. You have to be careful with those guys. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we didn't see him taking very many carries. Ben, you had the hard job of talking about this right after the fact on Saturday night. You've had a few days now to sort of digest it, maybe look back at it. What still kind of stays with you? What are your thoughts on this game now, a few days removed from it?
Well, there's a couple things that I said in that one that I probably still agree with. And then there's some things that I now that I've had a chance to look at things a little more clearly, hear some Georgia coaches and players talk about certain specific situations, plays, moments that, when you're watching live, you think you know what happened. And then when you realize after the fact, you actually didn't exactly know what happened. And so I think I think there was a lot of early first half pile, and it's to be expected. This happens anytime Georgia's losing a football game. There's expected to be first half pile on Carson Beck. There's expected to be first half pile on and Mike Bobo. I'm going to get out in front of this right away. I think Mike Bobo dialed one up on Saturday from start to finish. I truly believe that. I think that if you were, and I nitpicked a little bit on the podcast on right after the game, I said, I thought they got away from the run a little bit early. And I think that would only be considered an issue because they didn't execute on the opportunities that they had in the passing game early on. And so I can't even point to anything. I mean, if you told me Georgia was going to, have 500 plus yards of total offense, that Trevor Etienne would rush for 4.5 yards per carry, that Carson Beck was going to throw for 430, Georgia was going to score 34 points, I would have said Georgia was going to win the football game. And that's coming from somebody that picked Georgia to lose the game. Like, I was not expecting Georgia to win this game. If you told me all those things about what the offense did, I would have said Georgia won that football game. And that's why I'm surprised there hasn't been more of a microscope on. And I guess it's part of the credibility and respect that Glenn Schumann has built up over time. And I think that that's well warranted. But when I look at this game, and I mean, this is where I agree with what I said immediately after the game. To me, the most shocking thing is not that you lost to Alabama. It's not even that you give up a late explosive to Ryan Williams after you take a late lead. Like, those things are going to happen in close games, right? Like, those types of things can happen. What blows my mind still is that Georgia, knowing the significance of this game, goes in and plays like that in the first half. And really, it's not the first half, it's the first 20 minutes. I mean, you can look from the 12.5-minute mark in the second quarter to the 2.5-minute mark in the fourth quarter. Georgia wins that period of the game 34-3. That's crazy to think that Georgia lost a football game where they won that period of time in that football game 34-3. Now, again, I don't even point too many fingers at the late touchdown because Ryan Williams is a phenom. Jalen Milroe is going to give his guys opportunities. We've seen it time and time again. He's going to see chances, take opportunities. Ryan Williams is going to make plays. You still got to get him on the ground, but I don't fault anyone for giving up a shot like that to Ryan Williams when you're in single coverage. It's going to happen. But, for me, it's just like that first 20 minutes, 28 points, whether it's mistakes on offense that are giving him short fields, whether it's having no answers for Jalen Milroe. And everyone all week long wanted to spend a lot of time pointing on how you beat Jalen Milroe. But if Jalen Milroe does what Jalen Milroe does well, you better have some answers, and you better have some answers quick. Now, obviously, Georgia eventually made some really good adjustments, to my point that I just said, from the 12.5-minute mark to the 2.5-minute mark, and the 12.5-minute mark in the second quarter to the 2.5-minute mark in the fourth quarter. They made some great adjustments. They did not let Jalen Milroe do what he wanted to do. But the problem is when you let him do to the extent that he did in that first 20, at that point, it didn't matter, or it felt like it didn't matter. Now, that's where I'll say I have to give a tip of the cap to whoever, leaders, coaches, players, everyone that's responsible for looking at a 30-7 halftime deficit in Tuscaloosa and you're winning the football game 34-33. I woke up on Sunday morning and that was like my first thought was like, wait a minute, Georgia was winning that game 34-33. It was so fleeting that it didn't feel real. But yeah, I mean, to me, I think what Kirby Smart, and I don't know that he said this specifically at any point in time, but I'm sure what he's kicking himself about the most is just the dud that was laid across the board in that first 20 minutes. And it's not, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know. Is it game plan? Is it preparation? Is it nerves? Is it just flat out mistakes? If it's execution, I know he spoke about that yesterday in his press conference about what can you do about execution? Because it's just like a very easy thing for people to say, I didn't execute. That's that. And I thought he gave a very thoughtful response about, what you can do in those situations to enhance things. But it's just for it to have unraveled that quickly in that 20-minute span, I think is ultimately the part that doesn't make sense. It's the part that it's like, all right, is this, I would like to think that what we saw after that for 40 minutes of the football game, mind you, so a bigger majority of the football game, I would like to think that is probably the identity of this Georgia football team. And I would also think that not many other teams are going to be able to have a blueprint where you go up 28-0 against Georgia through, 3 minutes into the second quarter. Like that's not a recipe that's probably going to be successful for many football teams. But it's still, when you have the Alabama boogeyman over your head the way that it is at Georgia, I just can't fathom how that happened when it's clear now. Like at the time you could have just said, Georgia's just flat out not as good of a football team as Alabama. And it would have been easy to say that. Like early on in that game, it would have been easy to be like, that's why they laid the dud that they laid. But the fact that they came back and they take the lead and they have an opportunity to win the game, I mean, it shows you that it was just flat out an egg laying in the first, 15, 20 minutes of the game. And that I'll probably never be able to wrap my mind around that. I don't know if people in the building will ever be able to wrap their mind around that one, because I think that you could see it on people's faces how shell-shocked everyone was that it was happening. And that probably, played a part in it, that nobody could have foreseen it going that way as badly as it did, as quickly as it did.
After all that, Travis Bishop on Facebook says, get rid of Bobo.
Yeah.
Never change, Georgia fans. Wanted to play some clips from the interviews post-game because I did think a few of these were really interesting. And I want to start with this one of Kirby Smart, talking about what he learned about the team, what he learned coming out of that game.
We know that. We've been one of the few teams that hasn't done that, but we flirted with it, and we had several times tonight we turned it over. And we were more explosive, but so were they. And they're an extremely explosive team. I mean, they're going to be explosive all year because they're explosive playmakers. But I know the team. I got in that room. I didn't learn anything tonight that I didn't already know. They're fighters.
Yeah, the start of that clip kind of got cut off, but he was talking about we can't turn the ball over. Again, you turn the ball over 4 times. Alabama only turns it over once, as we mentioned earlier, on sort of that fluke tip that Dan Jackson's able to intercept. One other thing I wanted to point out that I meant to say a minute ago and kind of leave it open to you guys. Have you guys seen a Georgia defense under Kirby Smart that is this poor of tackling? I just feel like I've never seen so many missed tackles on the Georgia defense since Kirby's gotten here.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby mentioned the swarm. He tried to just say that, we don't have a swarm issue. We're getting to the ball, but yeah, if you look at Georgia's more heralded players in this game, like Malachi Starks, Jono Aguero, they had some of the biggest whiffs I saw in there. And at the same time, the edge position, that was a huge focus, I guess, from the fan base as far as contain things like that. But at the same time, this inside linebacking group, a lot of talent in that room did not play up to that level in this game. I mean, when you get in those one-on-one situations, you gotta bring down the ball carrier. and they didn't. You can't rely on help all the time. And so I think there were plays where, Jalen is just making multiple defenders miss, and James Miller as well. And I think that is something. I mean, having double-digit missed tackles in back-to-back games, to your point, I don't know the last time that's happened under Kirby, if it even has.
Ben, any thoughts on the tackling issues?
Well, yeah, I was trying to find out because I posted about it when I did the PFF breakdown, I think after the Kentucky game, and how they had more missed tackles in that game than they'd had since like the 2017 national championship game, maybe. And so to Kipp's point, like we are looking at an unprecedented stretch of Georgia not tackling well. And I think that when you look at reasons why certain players have been on the field in the past, like people have criticized Kirby Smart's decisions at DB, I think in the past, because they feel like they weren't as good in coverage. And I firmly think that a big reason why he plays certain guys at corner is because he knows that they tackle. I think Dalen Everett's a great example of that. He's probably one of the better tacklers in the secondary right now, but even he has had some, issues this season. I mean, Malachi Starks, you point out, he has not had his best 2-game stretch. And I think, I don't think it's an identity of this Georgia football team, but the more that it continues to happen, the more you can't look at Georgia this season and say that is the, North Star for a team that tackles. And I think that when you've watched, like I've watched USC football in the past, everyone's done it, and you watch them whiff on tackles, or they have guys in the secondary that just are not cut out to be making plays in space. And you look and you say, that's the Georgia difference. Like you can look at certain other teams play and say, like, there's other things that they do better than Georgia in certain areas, but that right there, Georgia does better than everyone. And they're just not doing that better than everyone this year. And, that's a key reason why you're giving up 40 points in a game and that you probably could win with what you put forward offensively. Though I will say, I mean, I defend the offense, but you have to acknowledge the turnovers. I mean, 4 turnovers in a game, first time since 2019 against South Carolina, and Georgia lost that one as well. So
to jump ahead, I do want to play Kirby talking about the tackling issue since we were discussing it. This is what he said on Monday, and was sort of asked if he thought it was an issue of swarm guys, multiple guys trying to get to the ball. Here's what Kirby had to say.
Swarm, we chart swarm, which is effort to the ball by other people. Football is played in a way now that there are a lot of one-on-one battles and throws. It's not usually in a phone booth. You miss the tackle, which means A, B, C gap. You're not like in those tight areas. We usually tackle well. We don't knock back tackle well, meaning when contact's made, does he stop and go backwards, or is he falling forward for 3 and 4 yards? That's been more our MO. Is falling forward, not knock back tackling, which you got to do at a better rate. But I don't think it's a swarm problem. I certainly think that we tackle at a high rate historically, and tackling as a whole is down across all of college football. But certainly for us defensively, we want to tackle better, and some of that has to do with who you're playing against. And I think a lot of them that we had the other night were pretty good players.
Now, Kirby said that at the end, but Smile London was kind of asked about it later, and he basically said, we're playing in the SEC. We're going to play the best of the best every single week. So I would kind of poke a hole in we're playing really good players. Well, you're in the SEC. You're going to play a lot of those. And to his point, historically, this is not what we expect out of a Georgia defense. And again, there are some young guys playing, but as we pointed out, you got guys like Malachi Starks, who an All-American, is having trouble tackling. And if this continues, we've broken down the schedule quite a bit. We know that Georgia's got a lot of challenges still ahead. They've got to be able to have sure tackles. And even like Kirby pointed out, if you got a guy stopped for a 2-yard gain, don't let him turn it into a 5 or 6 yard, because that extends drives and that can cause real issues. Wanted to play this clip of Carson talking after the game. And Carson's big thing talking to him was something that I kind of hit on earlier, of the slow starts on offense, particularly in that game against Alabama. A lot of that he chalked up to mistakes, not, bad play calling or anything like that, just missed opportunities. And in this clip, Carson was asked about, did Alabama surprise Georgia at all, particularly the Alabama defense? Did they throw anything out there that Georgia wasn't expecting? This is what Carson had to say.
We expected. They had a few different wrinkles, a few different things that they did. I mean, obviously, they're a very talented team, good defense. So, I mean, I'm not discrediting them at all, but, we made a lot of mistakes, and we gave them, some good field position, and, the offense didn't really help out the defense in the beginning. So, we got to watch film, just get better as the, weeks go on.
Again, that was kind of the biggest point Carson made, was a lot of it was self-inflicted on offense. And to his point, he talked a little bit in another clip about momentum and, the fact that the offense for Alabama came out, scored right away, the fact the Georgia offense wasn't able to keep up. I'm sure that put a lot of pressure on the Georgia defense. And, it was just sort of a vicious cycle early on. But I'm with Carson from what I saw. A lot of it was not poor play calling or the defense. The Alabama defense just totally shocked them. It was a matter of not executing. And Kipp, what did you think of that point Carson made? Of it wasn't quite so much Alabama's defense, which again played really well in that first half, but Georgia did a lot of it to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it still comes down to a lot of chicken the egg for me. I mean, again, you're going to have looks that you're not prepared for, and just like Alabama has to prepare for Georgia to have different looks at the same time. It's just now we have enough from the season to kind of look at this and say that, there are maybe some more differences with the loss of Bowers and McConkey out there. I mean, again, those were guys that you could just dump the ball off to near the line of scrimmage and they can get you close to the marker for a first down, if not an explosive. I just think you realize as this game goes on that Georgia's playmakers are downfield targets. I mean, like Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, they were. I mean, the biggest plays were plays that were huge chunks of yardage down the field. He was just letting it rip and go down the field. So, I mean, that still goes down to, if that's your bread and butter, then you have to put yourselves in situations to where those are, higher percentage plays. And Carson's got to be able to trust his offensive line, keep those eyes on the progressions, and know when and when not to check down. It was, it's a unique situation because the great unknown for Georgia was playing in this type of environment. That's not something that a lot of these guys had that experience doing. I mean, they play on the road all the time in the SEC, but this night game in Tuscaloosa was just kind of a different animal. But once they adjusted to that, it seems like once they got, comfortable, they were able to have more success, but it still boils down to, you have to know you're going to get punched in the mouth early on and be able to react to that. And that was something that Georgia was not ready to do. And I think overall, the third down number still, this game's kind of tough because, like Kirby said, I mean, you're playing 4 downs now, but I think still that first half is still kind of a microcosm of Georgia's issues, to where you have to always play with your hair on fire. You can't come out there and just know that you're going to be able to adjust. So I think that if you're looking at the second half as reason for optimism, then Georgia has to put that on film in the first half so people can go, okay, this team has learned from this experience.
Ben, any thoughts on what Carson said there about, again, he gave Alabama's defense credit and he knows they made plays, but a lot of it he felt like kind of came down to what Georgia did and, I mean, really didn't do.
I mean, more often than not, I feel like Bama could probably say the same thing for their stretches of the game where they were struggling a little bit offensively. Like, more often than not, you're probably missing assignments or making one mistake here or there, or, not executing on one of your deep shots or whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden the game's out of hand. You lost sight of, everything that was going on. And again, everybody knows what they're going to do till they get punched in the mouth. When you get punched in the mouth, you're down 28-0. Now you have no clue how you're going to react to everything. And so, I think that Georgia made some clear mistakes in that first half offensively that gave Alabama some great opportunities. I will continue to point, like, the mistakes that Georgia made on the defensive side. And again, I don't know if it's game plan. I don't know if it's preparation. I don't know what it was, but I don't think you can give up 28 points in 18 minutes to Alabama and feel like you're going to have a chance to win that game, even though I realize in some of those situations they weren't given the most favorable field position.
Going to take a quick break, come back, hear a little bit more from Kirby Smart, along with Smile Munden, as Georgia turns its attention to Auburn, and also talk a little recruiting news. guys, we had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart, Smile Monday, and Ernest Green on Monday as Georgia turns its attention to Auburn. Kirby Smart said that the guys that he had talked to since Saturday night were in good spirits. It felt like, that they had turned the page. I asked Kirby if there was anything on second glance at that game that stood out to him. He said some stuff, but was not going to share what exactly stood out to him. Thought it was really interesting at one point. Kirby was asked if he felt like he needed to change anything with this team because it's very rare that they lose in the regular season. We're going back to November 2020. And Kirby said no, that it's a lot about consistency. It's a lot about, preaching the same message over and over, no matter the outcome, not being outcome driven, which I thought, makes a lot of sense and adds up to the way Kirby goes about his business. I did want to play this clip of Kirby talking about the offense and, it being brought up when they got down, when they got desperate, they had so much success. I think they were 4 of 4 on fourth down, obviously made a lot of plays, obviously got the team going in that second half. And should Georgia maybe play a little bit more desperate on offense? I thought Kirby gave a really good response to that. That's what he had to say.
Right now,
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that, Joe. I mean, I can't sit here and say they need to play desperate. I think that's not a good choice of words to play desperate. I think they need to play aggressive and play loose, but I don't want to ever be playing in desperation. But there was good execution. There was some good execution on third down. There was some poor execution on third down. Some of third down was knowing you have fourth down, which is not really the case in every game. That was a very different game to evaluate from a standpoint of the second half, because everything was very different than maybe a start of a game. It's hard to even evaluate because of that, because you had to throw the ball, you had to catch up. But certainly proud of the resiliency they showed to do it. But just as proud of same with that, I'm disappointed at the start of it, But like I said, we got to go get ready for Auburn, who's a really, really good football team.
Kipp hit on that earlier, the fact that a lot of those third downs, they knew we got another down. We don't have to move the chains here. I do think that was important. And again, I kind of feel like a broken record, but we're having a totally different conversation, Ben, if Arian Smith catches that pass, if Dominic Lovett doesn't have the OPI. It sounds so simple, but to me, a lot of the issue when you look at going forward for Georgia, it just comes down to execution.
Definitely. I think too, the fact that it happened early, like you look at knowing how it, you're down 28-0, you start to look at what are the things that, happened early. To Kirby's point there, I think desperation's probably the wrong word, but it's just like you look early. It's almost like you need to have a more focused mindset on the little things early in a football game, because it's the tiny little things that you start to point back to and say, man, that really altered the way things look. Warren Brinson jumping off sides on that first defensive possession. Again, I'm not ever going to be one that's like, I'm going to point fingers and say that's the reason why things unraveled or whatever. It's just when you start to add up the little things across the board and across those, 15, 20 minutes, again, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the right choice of words is, to Kirby Smart's point. I don't know what the right choice of words is, but like there has to be some different mindset or approach or something for that not to happen that way.
And real quick, and you're not the only one that's done this. It was Jalen Walker who jumped off sides.
Was it Jalen? That's on me. I said all post game podcasts. I was correcting people that were saying it was Michael, saying it was Warren. So Warren, I issue a formal apology to Warren Brinson right here.
And I say this to also say the TV broadcast said it was Warren, but it was Jalen Walker. So just looking out to put the blame on who deserved it. And again, it's about being aggressive, and Georgia did that. They took a deep shot on the second play, and you look at you always talk about the opening drive of a game, that scripted drive. What are you looking to do? And Georgia came out aggressive. It just didn't follow through on it. Kip, any additional thoughts on what Kirby had to say there about not being desperate on offense, but trying to come out there with an edge?
Yeah, even if you give him the fourth down numbers as third down, they're still only 8 of 20. So they were still only 40% in that area. And you know what? The best way to, fix that is to get more out of your early downs. And I do think even in that situation, they still kind of just got away from the run game. And, with your defense, how do you avoid them running out of gas late in the game? Yeah. I mean, Georgia has to get more of its early down runs or short, they have to find a short passing game. And I think that's where again, this team is different than the last couple of teams. But for what Kirby's specifically talking about, yeah, I mean, they called some aggressive plays. And so that kind of gives you that glimpse of like, okay, maybe they did know in this situation, which what I said on the pregame pod was they got to come out fast in this environment. They have to. That's the only way you're going to, try to avoid, the lights being too bright for you is to come out aggressive, quiet that crowd, which again, I think that setting, I got to give Alabama credit. They ran a great game day and that environment was, I mean, obviously very enjoyable for that fan base, but it was a very, very strong environment. One of the best I've seen. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to take those risks offensively and be more aggressive and not get, people saying that Georgia only did that in the second half because it was desperation, you have to hit on those plays. And that goes right back to what we were talking earlier about executing. You got to find plays in practice that work. You got to find explosives in practice that are going to work. If Arian Smith is going to be your leading receiver, and which he is, pretty healthy and is on pace for over 800 yards, then you got to find ways to where he's not, even if he's by himself, not in a 50-50 ball situation where it might go through his hands or, he might hear the play. Like you have to take that into consideration and give him a chance to succeed if you're going to continue to go to him, knowing that he is your greatest stressor to opposing defenses. Which is what right now, that's basically what Georgia said. They're saying we believe Arian Smith is the greatest stressor to the defenders that we go up against. He's the one that can really, no matter what, win a battle and is hardest to defend. Then it's up to this coaching staff to figure out, okay, we need to get higher percentage plays with Arian Smith so that we're not, losing downs, because we're asking him to do something he can't do.
I wanted to bring up something Smile Munden said, and we'll listen to Smile in a second, talking about, again, it's so rare that Georgia's had a regular season loss. And you guys can correct me, but there's only a handful of guys still on this team that were around November 2020. And you're talking about guys like Warren Brinson, Nas Stackhouse, I think would be one of them. There's not very many who were around when Georgia lost to Florida in November 2020. So Smile was basically asked, hey, you're one of the older guys on this team. How do you help these young guys move on from that Alabama loss and not let Alabama beat you twice? This is what Smile had to say.
With a lot of the experience we got, a lot of the older guys on the team, like Carson, me, Tate, a lot of the guys that have been here from like 21 and on, like I feel real confident in the guys. I don't think they're gonna let it linger. We got confidence. We know what we can do as a team. We just got to learn from the mistakes and improve on it. And just, it's a new week, so we just got to learn from the mistakes of Alabama and then just move on to Auburn for real.
I mean, you think about it, Ben, it just kind of blows my mind that this is the first regular season loss for a lot of these guys. And, they have endured a loss to Alabama in the past, so they sort of understand that piece of it. But, I mean, I'll be really interested in how they respond on Saturday. Ben, what do you think about that? That this is kind of uncharted territory for a lot of these guys.
Well, it brings up a good point that I hadn't really thought about in the context of the long regular season winning streak is like how we don't know what Georgia looks like in the new version of it. It's a version of the program that's capable of winning championships that people feel is the best program in college football. How does it respond to a regular season loss? And to make it even weirder, we're now in a season where we don't even know what regular season losses even mean compared to previous seasons. And so it's an interesting coaching job for Kirby Smart going forward now in terms of how do you make sure that everyone stays on track, stays on mission. I mean, I think the easy default mindset is, Georgia, this isn't the first time Georgia's lost to Alabama, and it's not the first time that they've lost to Alabama and had the opportunity to still go on and, be really successful. I mean, they like you said, there are people that were on the 2021 team. I know it wasn't a regular season game, but they lost to Alabama more convincingly ultimately than this game was. And they went on to dominate their next football game that they had after that. It was a playoff game. It was, it wasn't against an SEC opponent, but it was, a dominant victory coming off of a defeat. And so I think that that's probably the most similar example that we can lean on and say, what do we expect this Georgia football team to be like on Saturday? Or not even just Saturday, just over the next, 3 to 4 weeks. What does it look like? I don't have an answer for you, but I'm excited to kind of see what it looks like on Saturday. And I'm sure Georgia fans who are entering week 6 that maybe skipped out on the Tennessee Tech game that are having to wait until week 6 to get a big time matchup in Sanford Stadium are probably going to be having fun this weekend.
Well, let's jump into that. Now 41 minutes into this podcast, talking about Auburn coming to town to play Georgia, 3:45 on ABC, at 3:45 Eastern time, I should say. Georgia hosting a 2-3 Auburn team, an Auburn team that has been one of the most underwhelming in the SEC, if not in the nation, continuing to find new ways to lose. They're coming off a 27-21 loss at home against Oklahoma, where they were on the doorstep of winning that thing, which would have been a huge boost for Hugh Freeze and company. Peyton Thorne throws a pick 6 late in the action, and Auburn can't respond and take another tough loss at home at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Kirby Smart, very complimentary of Hugh Freeze, talked about the respect he has for him and how hard it is to stop his offenses. And Kirby talked about basically the turnovers are the only thing holding this Auburn team back. He said he thought that this Auburn team was better than the record indicated. And I know that Auburn's going to have its hands full, but that they're playing for pride. I mean, I remember in the preseason talking to folks, especially around Auburn, who were sort of eyeing a 5-0 start when they came to Athens trying to win in Sanford Stadium for the first time since 2005. That's not how it's played out, but it's a situation where Georgia cannot let that loss from Saturday linger because Auburn has playmakers. We just saw a freshman wide receiver tear up Georgia and Ryan Williams. They've got 2 of them in Cam Coleman and Malcolm Simmons as well. So it's going to be something they got to show up. Auburn needs this one badly, but Georgia's a superior team. If they play like it, they should be able to take care of business. Kipp, what are your initial thoughts just about this matchup? Again, an Auburn team that is dying to get a win and would be you look at this game, this would by far be their greatest win under Hugh Freeze if they're able to pull it off on the road.
My initial reaction to what you just said is, I'm thinking of the Simpsons gif of stop, it's already dead. I'm not sure this team wins a conference game. It's explosive. They're not willing to, to take shots, but the cost of that, they've got 16 turnovers. I think they're the worst in the country as a result of that in time of possession. It's like 22 minutes. It's really bad. And it kind of goes back to that previous point of what you guys were talking about of this being uncharted territory, which I might add, the last time Georgia lost in the regular season, this podcast looked a lot different. I'm just going to go to say. So it's very uncharted territory. And for Kirby Smart, this is where you have to really call upon your motivation abilities. And how is this team going to react to Kirby Smart having to dial that up and say, you guys just felt what it's like to lose in the regular season. And with the way the playoff is, you have people telling you that you can lose multiple games and still get in. But this can snowball if you guys don't come out there and play exactly the brand of football we're supposed to play. Yeah, even this Auburn team that I just said is not good can come out there and make you look bad. And they do have playmakers. And so while I don't think that's going to happen, it still is on Kirby to kind of do something he hasn't really had to do before because they had won 42 straight games. I mean, they haven't had this issue since before they won national titles in a very different season with you didn't really have fans in the stands. So you have to go back even further than that. And so none of these people have really, experienced what this team is having to experience now. So I think, looking at this Auburn team, Georgia should be able to get back on track. But they have to really come out. And I think, unfortunately for Gus Malzahn, I think this is where Kirby Smart kind of gets his team angry, and they come out angry and they just take it out on Auburn. And that's what I expect to happen. But I mean, things that you expect to happen, you still got to line up and make it happen. So I think this will be interesting to see how Kirby handles this. Just knowing that a lot of this team, I guess, they expect to win every single Saturday, and for once that they didn't. So I'm interested to see if there's any changes, who gets more snaps. There's a lot of different aspects, guys coming back healthy, but I do expect Georgia to win the turnover battle in this game and handily, have over 30 minutes of possession at home against a reeling Auburn Tigers team.
Kipp, you made Auburn fans so happy when you said Gus Malzahn instead of Hugh Freeze. I think any Auburn fan listening, they'd take that in a heartbeat.
I thought I was going crazy, and then I was like, maybe Kipp was just living in this the last time Georgia lost a regular season game world, and he was mixing things up. And I don't even know. I guess Brian Harsin was probably there at that point in time anyway. But
yes,
but no. 2020.
That's what we'll say. You were just in a portal of a time portal, and you had taken yourself back to Georgia's last regular season loss. So you were just thinking Gus Malzahn.
I think there's a greater chance Gus Malzahn's coaching Auburn next year than Hugh Freeze at this point. I'll say that much.
Wow.
I do not think, if they do not win a conference game, that Vanderbilt game is going to be a lot more important than anyone ever expected, in my opinion, because I do think that when you start playing the quarterback switch game and then the fan base doesn't know what to believe, but I mean, how many quarterbacks are going to play this week? That's kind of the question. But yeah, you're right. I know a lot of Auburn fans, one in my own house, that would love to have Gus Malzahn on the sideline right now. And other fan bases in the SEC know, like Tennessee fans, like Florida fans. When you get rid of a coach, sometimes there's a little bit of regret, and I think that's kind of where Auburn is right now.
Wanted to read this comment from Sacred Grove because I thought it was a good point. They've got 2 super wide receivers, so our DBs got a chance to redeem themselves. I mean, that is going to be, if Auburn's going to be in this game, those guys have to make plays. Talked about turnovers. Peyton Thorne, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. The interceptions have been killing Auburn in these last few weeks. Ben, what about you? What stands out to you about this matchup? What are you looking for between this game between Georgia and Auburn?
I will say Gus Malzahn got the dog crap whipped out of him last week against Deion Sanders. So, I don't know that Auburn's feeling great about any of their last few head coaching choices, probably, if we're looking at it. But I think I probably have more confidence in this Auburn football team than Hugh Freeze does, by the sounds of the way that he talks about them in his press conferences. I mean, this is Bill Connolly from ESPN does his S&P or SP Plus, and he has win expectancies that he puts out every week. And Auburn has been expected to win their game 3 weeks in a row. They've had a higher than 50% win expectancy 3 games in a row, and they've gone 0-3 in those games. They had the highest win expectancy in a loss last week against Arkansas, and they had the 3rd highest win expectancy in a loss this week against Oklahoma. So I bring that up not to actually be hugely critical and say, how do you blow these games? And to Jordan's point, they found a new way to lose. I bring that up to say this is a football team that has been in position to win games 3 weeks in a row. Now, against much inferior teams to Georgia, teams that I would expect Georgia would have handled business against, and I would expect Georgia to handle business against Auburn, especially coming off of a loss. But I bring all of that up to say this is not a situation where you can just say, all right, we laid a dud against Alabama in the first half, played awesome in the second half. Now we get to turn our attention to Auburn and Mississippi State and just rattle off 2 free, Mississippi State I might have a slightly different opinion on, but rattle off 2 free wins before you go to Austin. I think that this is a situation where Georgia has to have a great week of practice. They have to have a great week of preparation, and they have to have a first half. I think I saw somebody in the comment section say, win the first half 38-0 against Auburn, and everyone will just, we're looking a few weeks from now, and people will be talking about that first half against Alabama like it's a fluke. Or fluke's probably a strong word there, but you guys get the gist. I just think that you cannot afford to sleep on this first half against Auburn. You've got to approach this game as if it is one of the most important football games. And I know it's hard because of where the emotions are coming off of last week, but I think that more than ever is going to show us what this Georgia football team actually is. And I really do believe, I think Auburn's going to be what Auburn is. They're going to do some things well. They might hit a play or two. Peyton Thorne might have some plays where you say, oh my gosh, I didn't know Peyton Thorne could do that. And then he might also have some really stupid turnovers that make you say, all right, that's why Auburn's lost its last 3 games that it shouldn't. So I think Auburn's going to be who Auburn's going to be. I think the determining factor of how much separation Georgia gets in this game and how much separation Georgia gets early is who is this Georgia football team? Is it a Georgia football team that still thinks it's the best, or is it a Georgia football team that maybe feels that it's not the same version of itself that it has been in past years? And I think that we're going to find that out truly early on in that Auburn game on Saturday.
Want to make sure and plug 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday afternoon, 3 p.m. Central. Nathan King from Auburn Undercover is going to pop on, and we're going to preview this game, really get to learn more about this Tigers team. Super excited for that. Nathan's one of my good buddies, and he's got the pulse over there in Auburn, and will let us know everything going on. Been a lot going on as far as Georgia recruits that are coming up in the 2025 class. You had another loaded future dog watch earlier this week. What stood out to you? Give us the lowdown on some of Georgia's big-time targets.
Well, because of the hurricane, it probably was a little lighter than most weeks. So for those of you that lived for that, seeing how Georgia players did, there was probably less updates than normal just because a lot of guys didn't play, and it's shifted around schedules all over the next week or so. I will say 2 guys who did end up playing that I got to call out. And I know that this is sort of timely because people are in their feelings about what Ryan Williams did to them on Saturday. And, you know, even though Georgia had 200-yard receivers on Saturday, I think that there's just this constant yearning for more explosive wide receivers, more dynamic playmakers. I think Georgia has 2 really special ones in its 2025 recruiting class at wide receiver. And I would say all 4 wide receivers that Georgia has committed right now fall into this category. But the 2 that played this week and their games weren't affected by the hurricane, Talon Taylor, he had another 3-touchdown game. And again, I put this out on social media. The fact you can say another 3-touchdown game, and I think it's either the second or third time that I've had to use the word another for 3-touchdown game for Talon Taylor, just tells you how dynamic of a football player he is. He scores in so many different ways. I think in this one specifically, he had 4 catches for 183 yards, and he took 3 of them for touchdowns. So he's just a guy that when you look at playmaking ability all across the field, line him up anywhere. He can do things in one-on-one. He can do things against zone. He can do things in the screen game. He can do things down the field. Like, you don't get many of those very often, or Georgia hasn't signed a ton of those guys very often. I think that he's definitely one of them. And then I think Landon Roldan from North Oconee High School. I mean, I've talked on here in the past how he's had 5 touchdown games this season. I think he was Georgia puts out like their dog of the week for their top recruit of the week. I think he got it 2 weeks in a row, the past 2 weeks prior to this one. I'm assuming Talon Taylor will probably get it this week just based on another performance that he put forward. But I bring all of that up to say Georgia's wide receiver group in this 2025 class, I feel really strongly about. I think that they would like to add a 5th if they could. They would also like to hold on to the other 2 guys that I haven't mentioned. Tyler Williams, who we've talked about. Miami's going to continue recruiting him. He has good relationships there. He's from Florida, so that's not going to go away until he signs with Georgia. But then I'll also bring up Thomas Blackshear from Calvary Day in Savannah, because there was some confusion on Saturday with what was going on there, because he sent out a post on social media saying that he was opening up his recruitment. Of course, people made the logical jump that they thought that meant that he was decommitting. He needed to clarify the fact that he was not decommitting. So I have gotten the chance to speak with him briefly about what was going on. And really what it comes down to is not everybody is, not everybody knows how the recruiting game works perfectly. Not everybody, is the most well-versed on social media. I think that Thomas probably wishes in retrospect that he had not ever posted anything about it, because it raised more questions than he wanted to. But what he is committed to Georgia. Georgia had not heard anything that he was decommitting from Georgia, anything like that. But this is a guy who has just straight up not had conversations with any other college staffs since he committed to Georgia in May. And part of that has probably been the fact that he's just not, he openly says, I'm not an open communicator. I'm not trying to talk to 100 different coaches. I'm not trying to do a whole lot of media. Like, that's just not his style. But he is now opening up the opportunity for other coaches to reach out and talk to him about things. And what led to that, what conversations he had with Georgia, just other thoughts that might've been put in his head about things, what led to that, I don't have clear answers on that specifically, but he is in Georgia's recruiting class. And I say that I think we even removed him from our commitment list at one point because we weren't sure what was going on, and we added him back in. So he is on Georgia's commitment list. I'm expecting him to be in Athens this upcoming weekend for the Auburn game so that they can have some conversations with him to say, like, hey, what's going on? What do we need to figure out to make sure, clear everything up? I just saw Sacred Grove say this in the chat as well. I am a big fan of Thomas Blackshear, the football player. I think he is a really, really talented football player. And if you look at Georgia's 4 receivers that they have right now, it's 4 guys that are dynamic football players, and they all do it in slightly different ways as well. And so I think you want to hold on to all of them. And then I think that Georgia would like to add a 5th if they could. And I think that everybody knows who their preferred 5th guy would be, but I'm sure that there's plenty of other options out there.
Ben, going from someone who is currently a Georgia commit to someone that the Dogs hope is by the end of Saturday, Usmani Cromain getting ready to make his decision. What's the latest you can tell us on that front?
Yeah, I'm gonna hit you with the pronunciation guide there. It's Usmani Chroma, and you actually nailed Usmani, which most people get the first name wrong. So you nailed the hard part. Weird situation there as well. He was set to make a decision on Saturday, which I always felt was a weird time to make a decision because it was the same day that Auburn was playing Oklahoma and Georgia was playing Alabama, and as we saw how those games went, you're setting yourself up to potentially commit on a day that your team that you were committing to lost, which I think is always just like a weird vibes thing to do on a day that you're committing. The hurricane did impact Usmani Chroma's game last week, so he ended up having to play on Saturday, and he didn't want to commit on the same day that he was playing a game. So he ended up shifting his commitment to this upcoming Saturday, which in many ways is even more interesting of a timing for him to do it because he's really making a Georgia versus Auburn decision. Those are the 2 programs that have been in this thing the most. And, recently Florida State was a team that has faded a lot, and Tennessee was a team that tried to get into the mix and was just never able to fully get into it. So it's an Auburn-Georgia battle, really, and he's making his decision the day that Auburn travels to play at Georgia. I talked about this last week that I was feeling favorable about Georgia's chances at that point in time, but it's never over until it's over. And when he made his timeline shift, I wanted to ask some questions around to people that I knew would be in the know on it just to figure out, does this change anything? Is this just a weird timing thing? Is this just simply he didn't want to commit the same day that he was doing it on, or that he was playing a football game? And I think ultimately nothing changed from a recruiting standpoint. I think that Georgia has been in a pretty good spot here since he took that game day visit to Georgia for the Tennessee Tech game. He has been back to Auburn and Florida State since then. So that, there have been conversations that have been ongoing with those teams. At this exact point in time, I do still feel good. I had him in my most recent mock class. I think I actually had him in my 2 most recent mock classes, but I wasn't super confident about it 2 mock classes ago. I was pretty confident about it for this most recent edition. I think that I'm probably the most confident in Georgia's chances as I've ever been. We've talked about another running back in the state, Shane Marshall, that's committed to Minnesota. He's supposed to be on his official visit to Georgia this weekend. I think that that's something that I'm monitoring too, that might be a little bit of a sign of where things are going with this because, while Georgia really, really likes Shane Marshall, I think that they don't see a realistic scenario where they're going to be able to sign all 3 of those guys. So I think that if things start trending the right way for Georgia and Usmani, chances are that Georgia's push for Shane Marshall will probably diminish a little bit as well.
Be sure and stay glued to Ben over on Dogs 24/7. He will have the latest on Usmani as he gets ready for that decision. Big time target out of Lee County, a guy Georgia really, really wants. Well, before we get out of here, Kipp, I'm going to throw it to you. Let's make it quick because my laptop is almost dead. But the Braves have made it to the postseason. They made us sweat it out on Monday, but as we're recording this, they're getting ready for a big game, 8:40 p.m. Eastern time tonight against the Padres to start the wild card series. How was Monday for you following those 2 games, and what do you think about this team going into the postseason?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you I didn't have any gray hairs before the game, but regardless, I mean, we all aged, at least a decade. For baseball fans, that first game, I mean, that's as good as it gets. I mean, that was incredible baseball. Didn't love the outcome. I mean, at this point, it's taken everything we had to get to the playoffs. But gosh, just having postseason baseball is something that You don't really understand, how much you miss it until like you just don't expect to have it for several months. You're already thinking about next year. So even though we're going against, we're probably going to be throwing out what our 7th or 8th best option as a starter against the Padres. And our Cy Young Award winner is probably not even going to be available for the series. We're out there and we get to play again and we get to watch the Braves play. And I think that's a great thing. We're basically getting 5 straight days of Atlanta Pro Sports. We're going to have primetime Atlanta Pro Sports, 4 days in a row this week. So I think that, it's exciting times. Let's just see what happens because, you just want to get there. Last year it was, we rested everyone. We were too rested. Now it's no rest. So you know what? Chop on.
The two extremes. Ben, were you there yesterday? Did you have a chance to
I was there. Yeah. Jordan, someone had to show up to the Braves game to actually bring them home to the playoffs. I know that we all couldn't take care of that. So I needed somebody to be able to do it. No, I felt bad because you've been a season ticket holder all year long. And I know you had the Kirby press conference on Monday and I was able to go. So I felt there was a level of guilt. That guilt was gone. And the second that Ozzie had the 3 RBI double and I couldn't believe what I was watching. I can't believe that there are people that were like having to feel the heightened emotions of the Ozzie 3 RBI double and the Dylan Bell touchdown on Saturday and then see it just all go away immediately. But you make the playoffs. Got the 5 seed. The Mets got the 6 seed. Who cares? But I will say it was fun kind of watching some of the Mets fans lose their minds. I felt like I was watching people that were like, I think that people were having outer body experiences while I was sitting near them when Lindor had that home run in the 9th inning there. So quick turnaround. Who do we know who's going tonight? Is it Ian Anderson? I saw that Ian Anderson was an option and I was like, what's going on?
I hope it's Ian Anderson, but I think it's going to be – my guess is Bryce Elder. They have not announced anything. But my guess is Bryce Elder. I would just bring Ronaldo – I would bring Lopez in after he goes to the lineup, hopefully twice. We just want this guy to get through the lineup twice, whoever they're throwing out there. But, that would be my guess. They would go with Bryce. But Ian Anderson in the postseason, just let him do what he did the last time. That's my preference.
And Ben, you might have felt bad for me, but given the Braves results the last times I've gone, it probably was a blessing in disguise that Kirby was talking on Monday. So I took one for the team and did my job, and hey, it worked out for the Braves. So we're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched us live, everyone who is watching or listening to us after the fact. Be sure to subscribe to Dogs 24/7, as Ben talked about earlier. Big commitment coming up. You want to be up to date on what is going on there. And obviously, we've got all the team coverage. Understanding, too, that Georgia men's basketball is about a month away now. Also, subscribe on YouTube to Dogs 24/7 as well as TikTok. A lot of videos over there, a lot of good stuff as the fall rolls on. So we will wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody, and chop on.